Thank you so much, Powell. This is fun. We're having an amazing time here today, right?
Yes.
All right, so this panel discussion is going to be an hour, and then we're going to take a brain break. Okay, so tune in and stay with us for just a little while longer here. My name is Julie Hiromoto, and I am the Director of Integration at HKS. We are a global design and consulting practice. And I'm here today to talk to you about the built environment, as Powell mentioned, and follow in the luminous footsteps of Dr. Upali Nanda, who so elegantly set the stage for us earlier this morning in a beautiful and provocative way. I'm going to invite my panelists to come up here and join me. So, first we have Christian Benimana, the co-executive director and senior principal of Mass Design Group. He joins us from Kigali in Rwanda, and his practice is also based in Boston. And he's our design voice and our philosopher. Next, I'd like to welcome Catie Ryan Balagtas, Director of Projects at Terrapin Bright Green. She works around the corner, but also spends a lot of time in the Philippines. And Catie is one of the primary authors of the seminal publication, The Economics of Biophilia. And then we have Ling Lokko with us. Ling is an assistant professor at the Yale University School of Architecture. She spends her time in New Haven and Ghana, and is our materials expert on the panel, and she's going to be addressing also the circular economy. And then finally, Zhao, who's the executive vice president at Delos Labs. He lives here in New York. If you haven't been to Delos or IWBI, they're just down the West Side Highway, and has also done a lot of work in the Middle East. So we have a very geographically distributed panel for you today, and he's our building scientist. So what if every real estate design, every capital investment opportunity was made intentionally and purposefully to support brain capital? You've realized the benefits of that just being in this space today, right, and participating in this event. We're going to keep building, whether that's new construction or renovation. So why not do this in a more intentional way that allows us to do it more purposefully, to get greater benefits, the co-benefits we've been talking about all today. And really, we want to shift the conversation from one of disease and delaying decline to a positive potential one about excitement, one about belonging, creativity, reduction of stress, and access. So about me, I was educated as an architect. I have passion and curiosity for environmental design and addressing the climate crisis through advocacy. And our profession really is commission-based as architects and designers. Historically, also a little bit transactional. We're asked to design, coordinate, do documents, and oversee the construction of a building, a park, a city master plan, one at a time. And at HKS, we're really working towards being partners and advocates with our clients to help them understand the true potential of their entire real estate portfolio and the diversity of the capital infrastructure investments that they will make over time and how to reap those benefits. So I'm an integrator, a dot connector, and a synthesizer. And what I'm here today to tell you is that buildings take a long time to realize, to finance, to design, to build, and then to lease up and occupy. I spent over a decade of my career working on One World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan as a designer, as a project manager, and I can tell you that we have no time to waste. We have to get started now, today, right? So I hope we take this into consideration as we think about and digest the remarks of our panelists, and really think about, as Upali challenged us at the beginning of the day, what are each of you going to do when we walk away from this conversation today? What action are you going to take with you? And what's within your power to start leading the change? So Christian, please, I'm going to ask all of my panelists to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about why they're here, and then we will keep going.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll try to be as brief as possible. It's difficult to introduce oneself in under 1 hour, but I'll do my best and do it in the few minutes that Julie has given me. I come from Rwanda. It's a small, tiny country in the middle of Africa. I was trained as an architect. I went to school in Shanghai, China, of all places. The reason why I'm on this panel, I met Julie, I think in Copenhagen. I think that was the first time we met. No, in Venice. Yeah, and we were talking about a lot of things, and we were talking about how our practices are really trying to understand the work we do and why. Because as she said, like architects, for many years, we get commissions and then we get asked to do things and then we do them. I work for a practice that was founded on the premises that architectural processes and designs are never neutral, that whatever we do has an impact. And you have to have some intentionality about how what we do actually does in the world. And for that, we've been advocates for an architecture of health, which I'm going to try and summarize. As I said, I don't have an hour to explain everything, but I hope we'll have an opportunity. We believe everything that we do should have a benefit to health, and in 3 categories: individual, community, and planet. On individual side, it needs to be from a personal physical health, as COVID taught us a very good lesson a few years ago. And it needs to have also benefits on our mental health, which I think previous speakers today have eloquently spoken about, which I'm not going to repeat. But beyond that, the collective of all that spaces start becoming something that we need to think about carefully, because it represents our collective psyche or our collective societal values. If you are in a city that doesn't have walkways, then you understand how much value they give to pedestrians. If you're in a city that, I don't know, presents a certain type of memory in their public spaces, and then you understand whose story is valued in that particular society. I think these are issues that the US and other places have to reconcile with. So as players in the built environments, these are things you have to be intentional about. A lot of time we talk about accessibility and inclusivity, but we don't really drill down and understand what those concepts try to communicate. So for us, community health is very important as we imagine all the processes we do for the design of our buildings. And then the last one is the planetary health. We don't live on this planet as ourselves as humans. We share it with, I don't know how many millions of other species. It's extremely important that we figure out how to balance our lives with the rest of the species on this planet, which is something we've been doing a terrible job at for the past, I don't know how many hundreds of years. So one of the things that we like to think about in our practice, we step away from the conversation around climate change and embodied carbons and whatever it is, and actually look about the balance. Like, how do we imagine the investment we do when we engage in the built environment, which is an inherently violent act? If you think about it, we turn the ground upside down to extract materials and everything so we can build our own spaces. But we also need to think about, you know, is that investment justified for all that to happen? I'll stop there and then I can continue later.
Perfect, thank you. Jay, I'm gonna ask you to close. So Catie, you go next.
Thanks. Okay. Hi, I'm Catie Ryan Balagtas. I'm educated as a designer, planner, sustainable development practitioner, and I first got interested in the relationship with the built environment and health when I was some 20 years ago. I worked for Refugees International as a liaison for a hunter-gatherer tribe that was forced to settle in this one area that just didn't suit them. I began to see the health implications of lack of access to economic opportunity, having to rethink, how does this people survive in a new paradigm. So I also lived in many places where the rush to build infrastructure kind of didn't really consider some of the health implications or the long-term economic impact to the community. And in many cases, they were using outdated policies and practices from the US and elsewhere. And so after that, those experiences, it was really on my mind to build a career around exporting a better model for sustainable development and salutogenic design. So in this time since I've been working at Terrapin Bright Green for the last 16 years. Terrapin is a boutique environmental consulting firm and think tank based here in New York. And we do a lot of design consulting, but we also do a lot of secondary and primary research regarding the built environment, primarily around bringing nature or innovations from nature to find good solutions for how we live and how our buildings perform. So in this time, I was a sustainability consultant for the second tallest building in the world, Merdeka 118 in Malaysia, which just achieved LEED Platinum earlier this year. And I also was the lead developer of Google's biophilic design framework for their workplace and real estate services for their global new construction and renovations projects. And most recently worked on the passenger experience strategy for the Portland Airport redevelopment for their new terminal in Portland, Oregon, and that just opened last month. And one of the primary focuses of all of that, you may have noticed, is I keep saying biophilia. And so for anyone who is unfamiliar with biophilia, it is the humankind's innate connection with nature and living things. And biophilic design is really the practice or the implementation of our understanding of biophilia, or that nature connection in the built environment. So how we can make those spaces more healthy and supporting, say, brain health, brain capital, through innovation from nature, or the research that we know to be from showing those relationships. So there's a lot of research around these areas, and I think we've talked about it earlier today about how there's this disconnect between certain disciplines. And so my job is often to translate some of that science into actionable guidance for architects, planners, policymakers, investors to figure out, what is the design imperative, and how can we frame it in a way that can benefit long-term impacts for not just the design course, but also post-occupancy, and so the users and how that might influence them over time, and potentially the communities at large.
Thank you, Catie. Hey, Ling.
I got it. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to be here. Thank you, Julie, for the invitation. My name is Ling Lokko, and I'm an assistant professor at Yale School of Architecture, as Julie mentioned. And most of my research has been around the design, development, and integration of bio-based building materials. Broadly, low-carbon, non-toxic materials. Although we started out with bio-based materials, so stuff that comes out of agriculture, forestry, invasive species. That's where we started, but we realized we didn't have the luxury of not looking at the large-scale muck that we've created in our landfills and our water. So plastics, paper waste, textile waste. We also develop a range of building material technologies. Last year around this time, I was part of leading and a primary author on a major global report from the United Nations Environment Program that looked at the direct relationship of building materials and climate. So to really provide a direct line of sight between how our building material practices affect climate. The big vision was twofold. One is to really increase all of our terrestrial carbon capacity in young carbohydrate materials, so growing afforestation of forestry, biodiverse forestry, cropland, also healthy soils. And as you can imagine, increasing that capacity has huge benefits across our ecology and society in terms of brain health. And the second was really to think about the built environment as a massive opportunity to store and transform a lot of these material resources that would have otherwise ended up as materials in the wrong place and the wrong time, so pollutants. And although we focused a lot on how these materials affect brain health, particularly in the use phase, we've talked about thermal stress, thermal comfort, air pollution in big ways, but really there's a broader life cycle of these materials all the way from where they're extracted to where they end up. And to really understand, all of the opportunities economic also that come along with what would have to happen in terms of bringing actors who haven't been traditionally integrated into the building material life cycle, farmers, new types of waste management companies into this process. Policy has been a huge lever for us in terms of our research, but acknowledging the fact that 80 to 90% of the world builds without architects, unfortunately. It's also thinking about how we might enter this through materials from self-built cultures that actually, buy materials at affordable prices. How can we start to think the redesign of them at that scale and for that market? Because we need the bottom up with the top down. So.
Absolutely. And I know y'all are very curious to learn more about that. And Mei Ling's going to talk about a little bit more in a bit. Jay.
Yeah, thanks, Judy, and everyone. So I think the point I want to make to kind of conclude and summarize everyone's talk, forgive me if I concluded wrong. I think the point I want to make is the built environment, the buildings, have huge impact on our brain health and brain skills. Combined brain capital, I learned it this morning. So, and that point, that's it, period. It has huge impact. We learned from Upali this morning, and we learned from Bertrand this morning, just previously. There's a huge scientific evidence that there's health impact, there's positive impact of the environmental, physical environmental and social environment in our brain. Then think about the fact that every single person here, we all spend 90% of time indoors, more than 90 most of times. And where that change happens is inside buildings. So combining those two pieces of facts, we know there must be, with or without clinical trials that's north of $1 billion, we know that this impact is happening, and we know that's a fact. So I say that because my background is in the intersection between building sciences, technology, and architecture. I got my PhD from Carnegie Mellon, and been working in the field called human-building interaction in about 15, 20 years. And currently I work for a company called Delos. We created the WELL building standards, known as the creator of the WELL building standard, which is a body of work to influence every single buildings, every four walls and the roof, any type of buildings, to make it healthier for people at the design stage, at the operation stage, at the policy and individual behaviors when the building is being operated. So my work is leading the research and innovation team in the company. And as an example how this happens, we learned about air quality, we learned about thermal, we learned about microplastics in water quality. There's also acoustic noise. There's the biophilia, we talk about mind. There's mental health issues of interaction within buildings of social behavior. There's nourishment. We had lunch today. How the design, we learned from Upali this morning, how the design impact the power, but the same logic of nudge or behavior economics, the design of our choices to eat food can impact our health. All of those design thinking and the things happening in the built environment have an impact. One thing I believe has the most impact directly to our brain of the environmental factor we haven't mentioned, is light. Light is the single most important thing that impacts our circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythm is our sleep-wake cycle, where it dictates our digestive system, going through every single neuron of our body. It impacts our hormone system, impact our reproductive system, all of the systems that's governing our sleep, wake, energy, sleep, all of these daily activities. Example of disruption of circadian rhythm would be cancer. Would be, for example, breast cancer has a high prevalence in shift workers. Why? Because they cannot sleep well. They're awake during nighttime. Another example would be, we experience jet lag. So many of us are coming from other places, and jet lag is everyone felt that. So these are the things. However, who's noticing these lights? No one, right? We don't notice them. They're around us. They're surrounding us. We don't pay attention. We install, unless it's broken, we don't pay attention. But these are huge impact to our body, to our health, and we should be paying attention to them. And the solutions, again, I think to Bersin's and the previous panel, Sarah and Mark, it's not rocket science today. There's so many things. There are a list of things that we can do. In the well-being standards, there are 100 features. There are 100 things. Behind them are thousands of literature, scientific literature we reviewed and summarized across all disciplines, environmental psychology, neuroscience, building sciences, many of disciplines. And it's there. All we need to do is do it. That's it. So that's the point. Thank you.
Thank you. So there are some QR codes floating around somewhere where you can read more about all these papers that everyone has mentioned. I'm going to shift us to our discussion portion of the session. And Christian, you brought this question up, that brain capital requires us to kind of fundamentally reconsider what is value, what do we value, and how do we capitalize on that value? And how do we better understand the life cycle costs over the duration, not just the upfront construction cost, and what the societal co-benefits are? And here's an example. If we think about Upali's example about the chairs this morning and that amazing power dynamic, we pay $1 to someone, the designer, to think about how to arrange the chairs. We spend $10 buying the chairs. We spend another $100 over the course of a building to operate it, the air conditioning, the lighting, all these other things, the deferred maintenance to keep that real estate asset humming as optimally as it was designed. And we pay $1,000 for the people benefits that are inside those buildings. And I'm talking about productivity, I'm talking about health and happiness, I'm talking about the insurance premium and those costs, right? So these powers of 10, where are we putting our value? And how are we being intentional and purposeful about those very first decisions that are made about establishing the vision, about organizing all the different diversity of thought that's required to come up with that optimized, elegant solution so that somebody else can capitalize on the benefits of that over the lifetime of those real estate assets? Christian, what say you?
I mean, it's clear, right? Like, how can I make that even, clearer? But I will build up on that point and live up to the promise I made today that I want to be provocative. And I'll offer this for everybody in this room to think about. It's my first time to be at this summit. I have to be very clear about that so people know where I'm coming from. And I was paying very close attention this morning, like everybody, talking about like really incredible, intelligent things. Everyone after another making an argument about brain capital and brain economy. I'm convinced. I'm sure all of us here are convinced. There's no problem about it. And my point of provocation is this. Why do we keep talking about brain economy as something that needs to be new, that needs to be created? Like this economy we're in, this is it. I think the question we should ask is, how do we create the right brain economy? Because it took so much brain capital to produce what we have. And that's where I come to the point you just brought up of value. And the value system that has created this economy, which we are trying so hard, all these intelligent people in this room, to maneuver and start creating better outcomes. And my point of contention is, while we do that, because it's necessary, it needs to be done, we still need to go back to the drawing board of those original value systems and change them. And we also need to question our own position and roles in perpetuating that value system of where we are here today, back to the built environment. I'm an architect. Every time I value engineer a school project because people don't want to pay my first quotation of what I designed, I'm complicit in diminishing the potential returns of that school in helping those children get better learning outcomes. So how do we, architects, to the example you give, make better arguments, scientific, social, philanthropic, or otherwise? How do we change our practices so that we, rather than spending $1 thinking about the chair, we actually make a valid argument of spending $100? So maybe we, imagine a better chair or something else that's not a chair. I don't know what, the outcome of the design process is going to be, so that as that value system is created, there is more equal access to how that value is created. There is equal outcomes or better outcomes or diversified outcomes, like whatever that we can imagine. I'll make one other point and then I stop so people can respond to what I'm saying. When I talk about our role, I think everyone in this room is incredibly intelligent, and we've all benefited from having our brains nourished by the schools we went to, the multiple conversations like this we've had in multiple places and everything else. I think one of the things that can make us unproductive in this particular conversation is to believe that the potential loss of our collective, when I say our collective, I mean here in this room, that our collective capacity for our brain to think and realize ourselves is greater than the current loss of brain capital that is not even being nourished at all, globally. And I think if we don't address that, there is a risk that even solutions we come up with are going to drag that luggage behind and will not make significant progress. Let me explain what I mean. We talk about capital that is needed, how many billions in research and those sort of things. I am not negating that is needed. But should we question how much billions of dollars go into the global education system right now and trainings that happen all over the world every time, and ask, what is the value to our brain that capital creates? Someone this morning asked the question, how much is your brain valued and how much are you willing to invest in it? We're in September right now. I know back home, there are people that just sold their cows to send their children to school. I know someone in California just paid $100,000 to spend their kid to kindergarten. Let's be honest. There is capital. The problem is a system of incentives and values that we've created that accept that that entire system produces so little for our collective benefits and ambitions to our brain. And I think if we don't change that, unfortunately, as in the built environment, we'll continue to think it's okay to say building in Africa or building in Asia is cheaper. No, it's not. Has never been, and it will never be. But because we've accepted that, we think it's okay to build a $50,000 school somewhere in the middle of Africa because they don't have a school. We don't question the damage that doing that creates when it creates that false promise of education, nourishing their brain so they can become a productive member of society. So the entire system, as far as I'm concerned, has problems. So what are we trying to do in our practice? We're trying to challenge ourselves to push the partners and the clients we work with and say, look, you're asking us to design a building, but let's see as much as we can, how much outcomes can we get out of this commission for our individual health, personal and physical health, everything that he was describing, good lighting, good ventilation. Like, let's do the best we can so that we can get that out. Let's question what that building does in our society. Rarely a school in Africa is just a school. It's a public place. It's used for multiple functions, and we will fight tooth and nails with our partners and clients to make it so. They don't like it, but we do it anyways, because we are convinced it's the right thing to do. And when we push these environmental interventions into our designs, it's not because we've set targets about being carbon neutral by 2030 and all these other dates, or because like some clients say, like, just we want a building, but make it environmental, like, sprinkle some environmental stuff into the soup, but otherwise I want some food. Like, it's because we believe whatever we are building needs to live harmoniously in that ecosystem. And again, clients really hate it, but we do it because we believe we have to do it. I'll stop there, and hopefully I've been provocative enough.
I love that. How much is your brain worth to you? How much are we spending on education, training, upskilling, and how much are we neglecting in the spaces that empower that to happen, that are also community infrastructure, social infrastructure through the built environment? I love that. Catie, do you have anything you want to add here?
I can respond to that. Actually, multiple points that I'm going to try to bring into like one idea. I don't want to oversimplify it, but I'm gonna. And yeah, so I don't even know where to start because I have so many different entry points on this. Sticking with the education theme, there's plenty of research out there from that looks at graduation rates or mental health in school for like teenagers, the rates of enrollment in tertiary education, and then giving back to the economic participation within your community versus like brain drain and so on. So a lot of that research already exists, but if we begin to understand what those outcomes, where they stem from, and how designing differently our primary education and early learning centers, if we design those to support the outcomes that we want for our communities, it might change the paradigm. It also changes like where our tax money is actually going to. So we're not just paying for poorly designed schools and then having to pay for for addressing the outcomes of poorly designed schools with like the challenges we have as teenagers and adults. So at the drawing board, we are already, when we talk about value, what we value, so we've identified what we value here: your brain skills, brain health, and for some people it might be economic participation, and others there's any number of values that a society could choose to focus on. But at the design table, we're already choosing carpets, we're building walls, we're building flooring, choosing the finishes for flooring, and windows and the window treatments, blinds, what have you. So that's already being done. That's done all the time. And we're paying for that. So why can't our design decisions be informed by the science and outcomes from our understanding of brain health, to choose carpet designs that are, say, biophilic, and window treatments that allow some daylight penetration and some view. They exist. We use them all the time, but not necessarily in schools. And so the information is out there. It's available to us, but if it's not a priority, if the design outcome is not focused on better test scores, better social cohesion, more attention in the classroom. Like, these are all outcomes that have been shown through the use of nature-inspired design. But imagine a world where we could have, if a school system, say at state level or even nationally, if all these public schools, if all schools were to design in a way that increased test scores by, say, a quarter standard deviation, the impact could be, a 4% increase on our GDP, if we want to use GDP as our measurement. But like, that's huge. But to get there, you need policies and practices that will really prioritize that value. And the problem is with the value engineering that we do today, conventional practices, it does not look beyond opening day, right? It's that first cost, that initial investment. So they're not looking at post-occupancy studies for that space and how like the graduation rate and so on for those schools. But I feel like we have the tools we need. We just need the will to make it happen. Now, to your other point, what we are seeing, like there's plenty of corporations, financial institutions, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, Google, Salesforce, they've all adopted biophilic design to some degree to improve cognitive performance and creativity, innovation in their workplaces. Some schools have done it as well. Airports have done it to improve passenger experience and cognitive performance among TSA staff. Hospitals do it to reduce stress among medical staff. And the list goes on. I could give you a ton of examples. But a lot of those interventions are very isolated, or they're private institutions or private projects. So what you're going to have in the school system is investment into creating these amazing spaces that are only accessible to a few. And so I think it's really critical for us to think about the public school systems, public housing, healthcare facilities where the tax dollars are going in and they're adding value rather than, having to be, having to pay for it or having to pay for it twice.
I love those specific examples, Catie, and I think that sometimes those design choices cost more. They don't always. But if they do cost more, it's because it's a newer product or it's something that the market hasn't demonstrated a demand for yet. And so we require the owners and the investors to insist on it and to be able to help us make the connection between the long-term, downstream value and impact of that.
I think the key point there, though, is sometimes when they cost more, it's because we're only looking at the short term.
The first cost.
Yeah. We're not looking at what happens in a year or 5 years or 10 years down the line.
Right, the total systemic value and return on investment.
Right. And like earlier it was mentioned, it was clarified that it's certain types of investment don't look beyond. I mean, 3 years, 5 years, depends on, how you value that asset. Is it short-term investment or is it really a long-term investment? And so,
So I think we've made the case for the value, right? So let's talk about now, what are we going to do with it, right? What opportunities do you see to integrate brain skills in design for brain capital across the design spectrum, the manufacturing of the building products, the construction, the usable life of the real estate asset sets, and through the end of life, through demolition, reconstruction, and its next life in our buildings and our cities? do you want to start?
Sure. Thanks, Julie, for that. Yeah, I think, you know, working primarily with building materials, I think there's a large percentage of the actors that are the most vulnerable, as was mentioned earlier, at the extraction phase and the end-of-life phase of our materials, are greatly affected in terms of brain health from, you know, mining, farming, waste management, where they're exposed to particulates, to toxics, and the recurring cycle of, you know, land to water to air pollution that they're consistently and chronically exposed to. And so there's a real opportunity when you think about a lot of bio-based industries or also recycling facilities that are begin to prioritize brain health or, you know, ecological health, where you see the actual working conditions completely transform. One of the materials we work with is fungi to grow building materials, and it's very different when you enter a factory that doesn't have large mechanical equipment screaming at you all the time. It's quiet. The mycelium are growing very quietly. You're not using a lot of toxic glues, formaldehyde, isocyanate based chemicals. These are natural binders, and so the smell is actually of mushrooms, you know, in the factory, as well as a reconnection with a broad range of biomaterials, natural fibers that we typically, you know, smell in a forest or a farm. So a very different healthscape for workers. When you think also of how this shows up in the building, there are huge social and cultural barriers, huge negative perceptions around using these materials. And that's primarily because we've got to come up, as Christian says, with a new value system around them. We have prioritized sort of antibiotic culture in our buildings. We want our materials to, I call it Botox materials. We don't want them to move, don't age, don't affect us in any way, live as long as possible. And so we pump them with glues and coatings just so that they are preserved for a long period of time. Not only does that drive up carbon, but we see all of the end-of-life impacts, you know, when they're degrading at their end of life. And so there's huge aspects of this in terms of thinking about, you know, brain health and brain skills coming across that whole life cycle. I primarily work a lot at the end of life, and we see the sort of transfer of skills from biomass recycling to metal electronic recycling to textile recycling. These are skills that are place-based. They're dealing with pollution locally. And so a lot of the knowledge and brain health in terms of solving things right in front of you because you have to, you know, is a huge, huge aspect of potential, you know, in terms of recognizing people who are typically invisible in our economic systems. One of the most exciting stories, I think, that we've, you know, been working on for the past few years is looking at how we might take the load off, you know, not only our soils, but on waste management workers. In Ghana, where we've been working with the textile recycling industry, Ghana is the second largest importer of secondhand clothing from the United States and Europe. And most of that pressure is actually on the most vulnerable women in the community, young girls who have to carry textile waste on their head. The conditions that they're working in, high heat, high stress, they're typically carrying twice their body weight on their head. And that leads not only to cognitive decline, but also, you know, sort of fracturing and damaging of the spine, which is irreversible. So one of the things in this new sort of green manufacturing, green collar job world is really to take these women out of those jobs, so they're taking the pressures off their body, and also introducing them to new types of brain skills in terms of designing, safely upcycling these textile products into building materials, whether that's acoustic or thermal insulation. And there's always a whole range of pathways that the building material can take, but again, if we prioritize brain health as the ultimate goal for designing materials, we would choose a very different sequence of transformation. We wouldn't prematurely downcycle or combust them. There are all sorts of roles in terms of where they can occupy in the building or other industries before, you know, they're returned back to our ecology. So a whole range of benefits across the life cycle.
So much potential, untapped potential. Thank you, Mei Ling. Jay, what opportunities do you see?
I think in buildings, what's lacking. I think its opportunity is also a challenge. I think what's lacking is people's awareness, normal people, not people on this row here.
Or any of you out there.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I think outside of the building industry, people's awareness of how preventative measures, how different product, how different technology, how different design, the big windows right here, how these things impact our health and impacts our productivity, impact our motivation and satisfaction to work, study. That awareness is lacking as a challenge. And I think these organizations, these summits, these people right here, all of us, I think our job is to breach all of our knowledge inside the built environment into the actual brain health or brain skill community. So this morning when I listened to the investors talking about investments in health, in mental health or in brain health, it's 100% drug development, health tech, and intervention for patients, which is, our company is funded by private equity. That's the investors we talk to as well. So the audience they're talking to are patients, versus for buildings, our audience are everyone, including patients, including people without disease, absence of disease. So I think that awareness is the challenge, but it's also an opportunity for architecture, building related professions like us, as well as the doctors, as well as the investors, the people in mental health, in actual clinical trial, clinical care, to work together to be innovative, to have funding, to create product to work for everybody in buildings for 90% of the time of our lives. I'll give one quick example. Again, go back to lighting. So what's the best source of light in the world?
Any guesses here?
Right, it's right there. It's outside, right? Today there's no sun, but daylight is also good, better than all of these. So there's so much opportunity to invest and to innovate, collaborating with technology, with surgeons, with medical professionals to developing technology or products inside buildings, and that impacts people's health, and quantify that, speaking the same language of IHMEs and all the public health and medical professionals, with linking that physical product of that to the risk factors of public health, to the disease or absence of disease of medical professionals, then to the economics of the impact of DALIs and the impact of the economic health. That causal chain of reaction from built environment product all the way to economics, that missing link, gaps in between, I think that's the opportunity we see that can be and should be linked and should be addressed by the people here. At least we're here trying to talk to the same language. So hopefully that's the...
Yes, thank you. So we want to hear from all of you. Pawal and Rim, if I could ask you to help with the microphones. What questions do you have? What comments do you have? There's one over there. And then and we'll very quickly, we'll hear all the questions, and then I'll ask each of our panelists to close with a few concluding thoughts, either addressing the questions or leaving us with your vision for the future.
So I have, I guess, two related questions. The first would be, are governments in general thinking about providing subsidies for building environments that are going to promote brain health? And I ask this question coming from Charleston, where there is a lot of development. Subdivisions are being put up incredibly fast because of the influx of people. However, when my wife and I are looking to move with our young family, we find it really difficult to find a neighborhood that's actually designed for families, right? Like, there's barely sidewalks. Maybe you'll get a neighborhood that has one sidewalk on one side of the road. but it's really difficult to find places that have good green space and some of these other factors. And so, how are governments starting to recognize this as being important, and are there kind of, I guess, programs where they're trying to include this in the design process? And I guess another kind of follow-up question is, what are really the key features of brain-friendly spaces in all of the different contexts? So, between school, work, home, neighborhoods, et cetera. I guess what are kind of the defining features, and how can we kind of use these designing these kind of key features to inform our decisions about where to live, where to move, and how to build in the future?
I love that. Thank you. So the question is, what kind of incentives or inducements are being provided at a national and subnational level? And then also, how, as a consumer, as an occupant, how do I make these choices to understand what is a brain healthier environment for me? Thank you.
I would like to ask a very similar question, but again, to extend a little bit that on, about converting places into brain-friendly places. So, of course, when you have just a field and you can build a building the way you envision, that it would be a brain-friendly space, how would you actually convert existing spaces? What would be the key features that you would aim to implement as pioneers in this conscious architecture, sustainable architecture, but also from this social perspective? And another question, a mini question that I would like to ask is, when we talk about productivity in a workplace, I think it is a very important aspect to look at. But then, how do we build economies that work for people, that not necessarily work to increase productivity in that sense, again, to exploit human resources? So to touch on that, how do we build a friendly space? Because multiple spaces are being built, with laundry facilities just next to the workspace, and then also a kindergarten literally 10 meters away, and then everything else kind of to maximize the time you spend in that place. So if you could comment a little bit on that as well. Thank you.
Great. So existing building retrofit, critically important because we have all these stranded or distressed assets. So how do we give them a new life? And then how can we do so in a way that's non-exploitive and looking beyond the boundary of the individual sight line or the four walls of the building? I think there was a question back here, and then I think we're going to have to move on.
So following on from the first question, where we talk about, are there government incentives for brain-friendly workplaces, representing the neurology patient and caregiver community, that's something we advocate for. But I'm wondering, are there architectural or design societies advocating or lobbying for the same things from their governments? Because actually the lighting is one of the first things I noticed here for people living with migraine or epilepsy. We need that thought about for schools, not just workplaces. Similarly, my first time in New York, I was thinking about all the MS patients and Parkinson's patients going along the pavements, the sheer number of pedestrian crossings. Could I push a wheelchair here? Could I wheel myself here? All of these things are so important. So it would be fantastic to know that other groups are also advocating for example, brain-friendly places and cities being developed.
I love that question. Thank you. We are building a coalition that Upali mentioned this morning, Building Brains, to gather all of those people. So as soon as we get that up and running, we will share that list with all of you. There are many in the space that are doing that now, but we're just getting started and getting organized in the way that Pawal and Harris and Rim have helped us get this larger conversation organized. Okay, final question.
Yes, very quickly. It's kind of going from, Ling, your point about the waste management and especially in lower middle income countries, and Christian, your point about think about building in different places around the world. One of the things, do designers, and when you're building a building, do you ever think about the waste that comes with the construction and all that, and how, because those are extra pollutants that are entering the environment, that the local communities that are living there and so on. So what is the thought process that can go? How can we make that more brain-friendly, more environmentally friendly as well?
How can we design for deconstruction and end of life? I love that question. Rim.
I have a question. I heard what you were saying, the connection with nature and our connection also with the other species in the planet, and then connecting this to the inbuilt environment. I mean, I'm reading a very interesting book about, it's called Lands, and how we started our economic civilization based on the property of the lands. And it's very interesting. I think I encourage you to read this book to give really an idea why we have started really all these inbuilt environments and, you know, developing these spaces for us to live. From an economic perspective, of course, going back to our thinking of property of the land, which is central, and then our space in the planet also, and how much we use the resources of the planet and so on. At the end, if we would like to go back to the nature and have a inbuilt environment which is conducive to higher brain capital or a positive brain economy, the cost per square meter might triple, might quadruple. So how do you find I would say, the balance to ensure that this concept will not be only for a very high, I would say, income countries, or eventually people with higher purchase power that can afford to be close to the nature, thinking of the fact that we've been trying to reduce the spaces as much as possible because of the cost, and also the cost of the material, which is going very much up. But then at the same time, to ensure that the smaller, the most expensive. So look at the cities, London, Paris, Milan, Barcelona, and I think these are cities where the cost of living has increased dramatically. And if you look at the spaces, they're as small as possible, and they are not connected to neither nature, nor light, nor nothing. So how do you find that what we are talking about, which is beautiful, will become really real for everybody, not only for the people with purchase power and the people who have the capacity to pay for it?
Wow, we could talk about that for a whole another hour, Rim. You know, it's a question of sufficiency, and I think it's a question of, you know, designing for why is nature perceived as a luxury only for the 1% of the 1%, and how are we making that more accessible to everyone? And I think there were some solutions here that were shared. You know, the sun is a resource that's here for everybody, right? But it's about how we think intentionally about that, and how do we redistribute the spending where the investment is also aligned with the value that's created in the end. Because right now they're on opposite ends of the spectrum and on opposite ends of the timeline that need to be reconnected. And that's why we need people like you, the economists, to help us. Okay, so closing thoughts from each of our... Yeah, I don't think we can, we're at time. So I'm gonna ask each of my panelists to start on this end and just give us your closing thoughts. We won't be able to address all these amazing questions, but we will follow up with writing and all of that. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to keep this super brief.
Yes.
Those are
Thank
great
you.
questions. I think, you know, to the question around, you know, our governments actually prioritizing brain health, you know, in the built environment. And I will say this, I said it to Julie, this, first of all, when this term came to me and this whole concept, I was like, never heard of this, you know? And it's made me think about how do we translate some of our biggest economic metrics to start to relate to brain health, whether it's carbon, whether it's, you know, health, material health, or the like, as well as, you know, the cost. So I think that many cities, neighborhoods deal with local problems that they can put a number on. For example, what is the cost of flooding in a city seasonally, and how much is the city's budget? How do we think about Trojan horsing some of these brain healthy initiatives through that? An example that we worked on as part of COP26 was to actually develop a bioswale in Accra's last large park, public park, as a flood control project. So integrating biodiverse rice that hadn't been seen on the landscape for centuries, incredibly flood tolerant, but also building the capacity to store and use that water in the city. So how do we Trojan horse this through, materials as well as living systems in the city? So I think that's one big thing. And then to the point of how do we design brain healthy spaces, I mean, I think there's a multitude of ways. But for me, I think coming from a materials perspective, it's eliminating a lot of what we know as toxics that consistently off-gas into our indoor air, our growing territory of the great indoors, but also that leach at the end of their life cycle in water and in soil ecosystems. And so that elimination, we've seen the proliferation of proactive certification programs which have a red list, so we know the chemicals that actually cause these behaviors and impacts. And eliminating that is one. But I think there's more aspirational aspects of designing with these materials. Biophilia one, which Catie is probably going to talk about quite a bit. The other is, it's not just a two-dimensional thing, what we cover our buildings with, but also how do we begin to spatialize it. We are so used to very drastic changes in our built environment. You go from an air-conditioned interior, relatively dry, to a humid, hot environment outside. How do we begin to develop buffer spaces, through a lot of these materials that can help temper, our adjustment to indoor and outdoor spaces and whatever is in between. I forgot the other questions, but I guess. Sorry, yeah, let's just move on. We'll come back over
rapid fire.
Thanks. So I guess my summary points, I think I'm just going to try to address everybody's questions in the shortest amount of period. Basically, how do we consider how we value what we already have? So to your point, like the bridging that gap between the haves and the have-nots, or the 1%, and to answer your question about renovations and dealing with a space that you can't necessarily change beyond the interiors. I think we undervalue a lot of the resources like sunlight, like plants, and we tend to force new ideas that seem bold but then are only enjoyed by some. So part of the way I feel like we can combat that or confront it is to value what we already have. And that is true not just for developed economies, but for places where they're just getting new roads, or they're just getting their first school, or they're just getting these like a new place to live. It's valuing the nature that they have and not bulldozing it over for a concrete building. But until that value is truly understood within the community, it's just seen as something that isn't necessarily going to help them modernize, or whatever their goals are. And I mean, I see it all the time in the Philippines, in other places that I've lived and worked, where they have nature everywhere, but when they build a new home, it's really just it's about surviving a typhoon. So they don't care about the trees. They care about having a roof over their head. And if a concrete box is going to do that, then that's what's going to be built. So, but if we can work with communities to understand the value of what they have already, and we could get a whole nother conversation into like vernacular architecture and so on, like where that could take us. But that's one opportunity. But also thinking about the renovation cycle for schools, for public housing, for hospitals, hotels, like all that infrastructure that we have. That's where a real opportunity is, because we're only building new buildings every so often relative to how much we're renovating. So then it gets into material cycling. And so I think, again, it brings it back, okay, where's the value? What's existing on site in terms of daylight, in terms of nutrients or waste flows? Like there's a lot there that we have to work with. It's just either educating or taking the time to understand what that opportunity is.
And how are the things that we're building now beacons for brain capital?
Right.
Jay.
Yeah, my summary will be very short. Building brain-friendly places are doable, are possible, can be done today. I guarantee you, if after this, if you talk to me, talk to my colleagues right there, we can give you 5 things to do in your home today with a budget of $100 to improve your brain health. We have projects in 130 countries, over 5 billion square feet of real estate, anywhere in rural Kansas to luxury, most expensive places in Middle East. So it's doable. It's doable in different ways, obviously, based on local cultures, but it's doable. So talk to us. We'll make your home better first.
We just need the intention, and we just have to do it. Christian,
Exactly.
scale it.
I'm glad Jay was brief, because I'm not going to be. And he can do free consulting, which also I'm not going to do. I'll give 3 examples of what we're talking about that I hope covers the questions that were asked. I think I'll go back to the question of creating value. And the first example I'm going to use is the one you talked about, daylight. And the point I'm going to make is this. Designers, we're not short of ideas. We are very creative. Architects and designers were very good. There is a casino in Las Vegas called the Great Venetian. They have a space that is day lit at a specific time of the day, 24/7. I don't know if anybody has been in that place. It's amazing. It doesn't get dark, it doesn't get any whatever. Like, they fine-tuned that space to Venice specific time, and it's lit like that 24/7. So they've been able to translate the value of daylight into profits for a casino. And there were some amazing architects, some light designers that designed them the right conditions to achieve that. So what I'm trying to communicate is this, is that in our work, for all of these things we're talking about to happen, we need to apply the creativity and our advocacy and our
Willpower.
right, to create the balance of where that value is allocated, so that if people understand the value of the benefit of sleep, then it's not lit to that time of the day 24/7. It can be applied differently. The second example I'm going to give, again, back to the value system, is about land, which is a good point that she raised. We're operating in a constrained system where we talk about land and its permanence as the precondition that needs to exist for us to secure value, reduce risks, investment, etc., etc., etc. We forget that there are hundreds of millions of people around this world that their lives are not tied to land. Their cultures are not tied to land. They're like, they live on sea, or they're nomads. So like we've created a governance system, an economic system that completely disenfranchises these people, and they can't see an investment. And because of that, we architects and designers, we're not part of their lives. We're not investing time to think about space and living in their conditions. We are all busy in Manhattan undercutting each other, trying to build the next tallest tower. When we think, if we can expand that value system, we're able to also start going through these water-based communities or these nomads and try to imagine creating spaces that go with them and have less to do with that permanence that we've created in our lives that is tied to land. And that's something we need to work on, because like the brain health is also cannot be disconnected from people's cultures and backgrounds and context. That's the second example. The third example that I'm going to give is around material. And I think someone mentioned about waste. One of the things that we try to do in our project is to try and build as much as possible with what is within the vicinity. Like, we measure part of our success by how far we have to travel to get things we need to build our buildings. But even then, it's not enough how we transport those materials. Because we believe if it comes nearby and we destroy the building, it can go back into the same ecosystem. But even that is not enough. We have to change our regulatory and incentive systems for project building. Very quick example, we build with volcanic rock when we are building in the north of Rwanda because it's an abundant material. It's a volcanic region. And when the masons are chipping it with their hammers, it doesn't produce dust. So it's healthier for them, but it's slow. So if the project manager has put a timeline when the project needs to be completed and is pushing for that, then you have to go get these cutting machines that create so much dust that it becomes a problem for the workers. So then it becomes this question: do we do it the healthier way, but it takes longer, or do we do it faster with masks, which our masons don't want to wear? Like, we have to be like principals walking around the classroom, making them like children wear their masks because they feel uncomfortable working that way. So there's a bunch of things that we need to change, both from belief to practice to desired outcomes, for any of the things you are talking about here to actually start yielding the vibrant economy that we hope it can produce. Those are my departing thoughts. Thank you.
Please join me in a round of applause, thanking this expert panel for sharing their expertise and knowledge with us.
Thank you so much, Julie, and everyone, for this reinvigorating session. Now we need to have a quick coffee break, just stretch our legs, get our caffeine level up to the right, and then we will get started, right? So just 10 minutes, please.